Sally Ember, EDD, with a wonderful guest in our episode 2 of Changes. This is Marianne Jones. Say hi to everybody, Marianne.
Hi.
Thank you for coming in at the very, very last minute, and by that I mean really last minute. Our original guest, Anna Fektorovich, had some unusual problems come up at the last moment, and Marianne just jumped right in, and I'm so appreciative. We spent the last 45 minutes or so getting ready, and she's very new to this, so be nice to her. This is her very first HOA, and this is only my second one. Those of you that have your critical hat on, go right ahead. Be critical, but be nice, okay? Because we're just doing what we can do here. And what I want to explain to everybody about Marianne is in the comments section on the HOA page. Now, the event page and HOA and I are having a big fight. We started this fight last week. Mark Seidel and I tried to fix this fight. Mark, you remember, I have 2 event pages again. I don't understand how this happens. So I put all these comments on one page, and then this other page appears. That seems to be the real page, because that's the one you can click on and watch. And so I put all these other comments on the first page saying, don't stay here, come to this page. We'll see if that works. I'm really frustrated with Google or myself, or I don't know what the glitch is, but I hope one of you is smart enough to tell me after the broadcast, or put in something in the Q&A, or put something in the comments, because I am looking at the real event page, and the real event page says, welcome, leave comments. So the other one says, don't leave comments here. So that's how you know if you're on the right page or the wrong page. You could also use the YouTube link, but I am not monitoring comments on YouTube. That would just make my brain explode, because I'm the only one doing this with Marianne today. I don't have Sheila Strover as my comment wrangler. That is such a great thing that Melanie gets to have, and I don't get to have that. So I'm all on my own. All right, all those disclaimers aside, welcome Marianne, and thank you for joining us. Marianne is a poet and an author and a former teacher and a choir director, and lives in the great north, but not as far north as you can, in Canada, north of me. And the place you live, if I'm right, is Thunder Bay, Marianne?
Yes, that's right. It's on the head of Lake Superior.
Okay, so being on the head of Lake Superior, does that mean you get tourists?
Yes, we do. It's a very, very picturesque area. It's the North Shore is very beautiful and rugged, and we have thousands of inland lakes, literally. So you can imagine how lovely it is.
So does that mean that some people from the United States might actually not only have heard of Thunder Bay, but might have been there? Or do all your tourists come from Germany and Australia and Switzerland or something?
No, probably most of our tourists do come from the United States. A lot come here for fishing, hunting, and things like that, because there is a lot of nature and wildlife. It's ideal for that.
Okay, and for those of you that are Canadian deficient, that's in Ontario, right?
Yes, that's in Ontario, right in the center of Canada.
Okay, that's great to know. Many people are completely deficient in geography. I consider myself geographically impaired, because even when I learn it, I forget it, a lot of it. But some things I know, and I know that's in Ontario. So thank you for joining us from Eastern Time Zone. I'm in California, as some of you know. So we're 3 hours apart in theory, but right now we are together. And one of the things I wanted to do, and which I like to do with all of our authors, is let people get to know you as an author. So I'd like you to speak to the screen I'm about to show everyone, which is your Amazon author page. Woohoo! Here we go! Very excited. And one of the things that happens on the Amazon author page is that you get to see all the things that our dear author, Marianne Jones, has been writing, and what kinds of things are involved in that, and what would you like to say? Is it showing up? Is it working?
I'm not seeing anything. No, I'm afraid I don't see anything. I seem to have lost you. At least I can't hear you. We've lost our connection. Okay. Hmm. Hmm. Oh dear. Okay. Hello. Hmm. Hmm. Google Hangouts. Here we go. Oh, okay. Okay, I seem to have lost you, Sally. Hmm. 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 It says here you have left the group chat. So I am sitting here by myself. Now you have joined the group chat. Okay, there we go. Okay. I see you, but I cannot hear you. Hmm.
Are you still there, Marianne?
I'm right here.
Hey, everybody. Sorry about this. I don't know whether you can hear me, but I'm not seeing me. I'm only seeing Marianne. So
I'm seeing you,
what's going
so
on? I don't know.
I am seeing you, Sally, so I'm
Oh,
sure
now you can hear me. Were you talking while I was gone?
I was trying. Yes, I was talking. I didn't know if I had done something, but
No, it wasn't you. It was Google and I having a fight again. I don't know what the deal is. Thanks for continuing. It was like really hard to get back on.
oh
What you
dear.
talk about? I missed it.
Oh, actually, I guess I should have missed a golden opportunity. I just kept saying, Sally, I've lost you.
Now, see, that was your chance. You could have talked about whatever you wanted. I'm so sorry. Well, that happens sometimes. Google is just not the most reliable source of anything yet, but we're trying. Sorry, audience, for that little glitch. So where were we? I was going to share your Amazon author page. I'm almost afraid to do it now, but I'm going to try again, see if that works, okay?
All right.
If it doesn't work, then you should just keep talking about your books or read us a poem or something, all right?
All right.
If I
All
get
right.
kicked out again, don't look for me. Just be good and entertain people over there, okay?
Okay. All right. I will do that.
All right, let's try this again, folks. Take two, sharing the screen to show you some of the great works by Marianne Jones. Uh-oh, it looks like it's going to crash again.
Uh-oh.
Well, maybe not. Maybe it's working. Let's see, are you seeing the screen?
not. Hello? Have I lost you again? Well, all right then. In that case, while we're waiting for Sally to return, I'll show you my here on the ground poetry book, and I will read to you a poem about Surprise Lake, which is one of the lakes in my area. And it's a lake where we spent all our summers when I was a child, so it is very dear to my heart and filled with memories. Surprise Lake. Looking back, words freeze. There are memories layered and glued too tight to separate and examine. Coffee and sunlight in my grandparents' camp. Smell of birch smoke and sound of radio tuned to the Finn language station. My grandparents' relentless bickering while we played upstairs and cracked peanut shells. When my father drank, we knew it by telepathy. A heaviness in the summer air. An eloquent silence in the trees. Unhappiness that spread like a stain.
I'm giving up on that screen sharing.
Silence grew and overtook everything. Summers were our senses. Rings in the water from tossed pebbles. Buzzing of motorboats and power saws. Burning sweat of bodies in the heat. Itching where mosquitoes had fed. Lapping of waves at night. Amazement of stars. We lived our days through our skin. Understood our lives had no beginning or end.
Oh, I really like that one.
Thank you.
I got to hear the end of it anyway. It kicked me out again, so I'm giving up on the whole screen sharing thing. Just
I
put...
think that would be wise.
Fine, you know, when we were trying it, just you and me, but now it's just freaking out. So I'm saying never mind, and I'm not going to keep doing that to our listeners. But I don't know what your problem is today, Google, but you and I are going to have words at some point, because that's just not right, that you would crash me out every time I try to show the Amazon author page of our great poet and author, Marianne Jones. So thank you for reading that poem. What was the name of it?
That was called Surprise Lake.
Okay, and was that written about Lake Superior or a different lake?
That is one of the many inland lakes that we have in our area, and my parents and grandparents had little, well, what we call them up here is camps. I guess in other regions of North America, they're called cottages or cabins. And we used to spend all our summers there when I was a child. It was fairly primitive. We had no electricity or running water, but they were the most glorious summers and just such a wonderful part of my life.
Now, are some of those places still like that, like as primitive as that, or have a lot of them been upgraded?
No, they're not like that anymore so much. There are a few, but the gentrification has been happening on the lakes. At one time, when my grandparents bought the property, lakeshore property was quite inexpensive, and so a lot of Finnish people bought up properties and built camps and saunas. Now it's more the well-to-do people who are buying the property, tearing them down, building mansions. So it is the end of an era. It's kind of sad.
Yeah. Do you write poems or stories about that?
I haven't so far, but I have written a story called Last Swim, a short story about my memories of my grandmother and the sauna, all those very vivid sensory kind of memories I had as a child.
Are people in your family Finnish?
My mother's family was Finnish, My dad was born in Scotland, but
'Cause I have some friends who established a Finnish sauna, saying the same way you do, in New Hampshire, no, Massachusetts, in the late 70s, and I was part of a community that would go weekly, and we'd have potlucks, and we'd all be in the sauna, and this was in a very cold part of the country, obviously, at that time especially, and then we'd go roll in the snow or get into this freezing cold water. We didn't have a nice frozen lake to jump into, but is that what you did? Did you get in the hot sauna and then jump in the frozen lake and go back in the sauna like that?
well, we only spent our summers there, so
Oh, okay.
the water was very warm and lovely. And yes, we would sauna, jump in the lake, sauna, jump in the lake as many times as we could. It was, oh, it's the most glorious thing.
It
And
is. It
back
is. And
then,
that's a cold lake, right? Those lakes are cold,
Lake Superior is cold because
even in the summer.
it's the largest freshwater lake in the world. So
Oh,
it's
I didn't
very,
know that.
yes, it is. It's called the Inland Sea because it's almost like an ocean in a way, except that it's freshwater. But the little inland lakes, they're much warmer.
Now, is Lake Superior the one that people have written all those songs about in the boat disasters and things like that?
That's the one. That's the one.
Okay.
It can be a very rough lake. Uh, it's you would you don't want to fall off the boat in that weather in that lake because you would get hypothermia very quickly. It's
Wow.
extremely
So you don't really just swim around unless you have a wetsuit or something.
yes, pretty much.
Okay. Well, I think it was Stan Rogers that I knew about that wrote a lot of songs about the Great Lakes and about the shipping and about some particular boat sinking disasters that happened. Are you familiar with his
Oh
songs?
yes, oh yes, and
Is
yes,
he
there have
from
been
that
some.
area?
Pardon me?
Is he from that area? I don't know where he's from, where he
No,
was
he's
from.
not from this area at all, but it is a lake that has inspired a lot of songwriters and poets and writers because it's not quite like any other.
Sure, sure. Well, one of the things I noticed about your poetry is it has a lot of water sounds, even when you
Yes.
weren't talking about the water. Is that on purpose?
It's not on purpose. It's because having grown up surrounded by water, water has just informed my writing. It's so much a part of who I am that when I have driven across the prairies in Canada or even to the mountains in Alberta, they're lovely, but when you're an Ontario girl, you miss the water.
Sure, sure. I remember that. I mean, I grew up in Missouri, in St. Louis, but I spent a lot of summers at a camp in the Ozarks, and the Lake of the Ozarks, of course, is one of the biggest human-made lakes that's ever existed, as far as I know, almost anywhere. And part of what I loved about that lake was that it had a lot of little coves or inlets, and the summer camps that I was going to had these little coves that they were pretty much the only thing in the cove. And we had water skiing and canoeing and sailing and swimming, and unlike your lake, this was a much warmer lake. So we really could hang out in the water for hours and just lay on our backs and look at the clouds and swim around. And we took these long canoe trips around the lake. 4 days, 5 days, we didn't even get across or around the whole lake.
That's
Canoeing like
wonderful.
all day, every day. It was that big. We'd have trucks come and pick us up and bring us back, so we didn't have to canoe back. And there were rivers around there too. I mean, it's very similar, I think, to where you are talking about. Just a lot of water.
Yes,
And
yes.
then I spent 2.5 miserable years in New Mexico. No offense to New Mexico, okay? But man, I used to get so starved or thirsty or whatever the word is for water. If somebody turned on their sprinkler, I would smell it and I would go running around to find, where's the water? Where's the water? I was so desperate. It was terrible. I was in southwestern New Mexico, and you know, it was in a drought for one thing, and secondly, they don't get a lot of rain or water anyway, except for in maybe August. Then I moved to California. I've been living in Northern California for about 12, 13 years, And when I first moved here, there was quite a bit of rain, and then in the last 3 or 4 years, we've been in the worst drought ever recorded. So it's scary and it's horrible, but it's also just, I miss rain. I miss water. There's almost no lakes that you can swim in here, or the rivers aren't really all that friendly, and the ocean is freezing. It's really unfriendly. So I'm going back to Missouri where the water is friendly, at least some of the time, and there's plenty of it, thank goodness. Although then we get flooding. Do you get flooding where you are?
No, no, we don't, fortunately.
That's lucky. Well, we also get tornadoes. I bet you haven't gotten any of those either, right?
No, we don't get tornadoes either.
Of course, with global warming and everything inverting, who knows? You may become the next tropics for all I know.
Well, that's right. Climate change is definitely happening.
It is true. So one of the things I know about Canada is that there are lots of particle accelerators and electron stretchers and things that go deep under the ground in different provinces in Canada. Are you aware of that going on in Canada? All this physics testing?
I'm afraid I am rather scientifically challenged.
Well, that's okay. What kind of teacher were you when you were a teacher? You said you were retired.
I was an elementary teacher.
Oh, I did that. What grades did you stay in mostly?
Mostly grade 4, which is my favorite age group.
I could see that. I taught kindergarten, pre-kindergarten, first grade, second grade, fifth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade, every high school grade, and a few graduate and postgraduate, undergraduate, non-school, corrections, probation, education, adult ed, ESL, and staff training and adult ed, so other kinds. So I've done a lot of different teaching. I didn't stay in the classroom. How long did you stay in the classroom?
Actually, my teaching career was rather short. I didn't go into teaching until my children were in high school. And then I went to university, got my teaching degree, taught for 5 years in the classroom, and then I stopped teaching, but I continued to contract with the school to direct their choir productions. So I did that for a few more years. But then
And did you also do musical theater or just regular choir performances?
Both. We did do some musical theater. I'm very passionate about theater, but we also did straight choir performances.
And so that's something you and I have in common, because I started as a singer, and then I was kind of mediocre as a singer, but I was a great accompanist. I'm a really good sight reader, or I used to be. And I used to play for the musicals and also sing in the choirs for the mediocre singers. We had some amazing singers in the upper level choirs. And then I did some professional accompanying later on in some musical cabarets, and I was musical director for a production that we did and when I was an adult. So I love that too. I think it's really fun, and I think people get a lot out of it that they're not even realizing. Do you have a favorite show that you like to be part of?
Oh my goodness. One I have never done, but I would dearly love to be part of is Guys and Dolls.
Oh, really? What part of that do you like? Is it the Don't Rock the Boat, that one? I love that song.
Sit down, you're rocking the boat. Yes. Yeah, that's delightful.
What is it about that? Is it the theme of salvation? That's a big theme in that, right?
It is, but no, I loved the music. I just found it so much fun. Yeah, it's an absolute blast.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't get to do that show. I've seen it a number of times, but I didn't get to do that one. But I think that a lot of people like that, especially because they made that movie with Marlon Brando and Frank Sinatra in it. So that made it really popular, right?
Yes.
That was fun. Well, as long as we're talking about things like salvation and the Salvation Army Band, you and I have some interesting overlaps where you identify as a Christian author and I identify as a Jewish Buddhist author. And I know I have a lot of themes in my books related to that. Do you also in your poetry, in your books?
It does come up. Now, I don't write poetry with deliberate religious intent uh, or preachy intent at all. I write
Uh-huh.
I write poetry for the love of poetry, and so it comes out of who I am and what happens to be on my mind. And so some of my poems will reflect my religious beliefs for sure, but oftentimes when I look on the internet as someone who identifies as a Christian poet and I check it out, it's often um, strikes me as preachy in intent. And
Uh-huh.
it's more about preaching than it is about poetry. So that is not my style at all.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. Well, some people would say that it's hard to write anything that isn't from that perspective if it's something that's important to us. But what you're saying is that you don't make it overt.
No, not no, except I mean there are some poems where it may come out more clearly, but it is part of my worldview. I mean, it's like your comment about water. I don't say today I'm going to write a poem about water, but if I happen to be sitting by water, it's going to come into my poetry.
Right, right. Like I'm a big fan of poetry, and I write really mediocre to bad poetry, but I really like it. And Theodore Roethke's been one of my favorites forever. And his poetry was infused with garden imagery and a lot of stories about gardens and plants. And I guess his father had a greenhouse or had a greenhouse business.
Yes,
And
yes.
so you've read some of his poems?
I did actually. It was he was one of the poets I studied in university, and he grew on me. Oh, no pun intended. Um, I wasn't sure at first, but as we got into it, I it really began to speak to me, and I could see how something that was so much a part of your childhood and your growing up life, it just becomes part of your consciousness, and then everything you write has that theme.
That's
Uh,
really true. It's really true. And he made it really obvious, I guess, that people could study it. That he wrote about his father's alcoholism and he wrote about his father's business and how it affected him, both the drinking and the love that came from his father, both. And then he also suffered all his life, and now we're talking about something very pertinent, from depression. And
yes,
spent quite a lot of time in what they used to call, maybe they still call, a sanitarium, which is where they would send people who had mental health or sometimes other physical health problems. And he wrote those couplets. Did you read that poem called Lines Upon Leaving the Sanitarium?
I believe I did, but it was a great many years ago.
Well, me too, but some of them really stuck with me, and I would remember them over and over again. And I'm not one to memorize poetry, but he had such a great sense of humor. And some of his poems were so funny, and he has some couplets from there. And one of them is, long gazing at the ceiling will, in time, induce a mental ill. That was one of them.
Oh, yes.
And then he wrote, self-contemplation is a curse that makes an old confusion worse.
Yes, yes, very
That was a
true.
good one. And then he also wrote a book of poems for children. And I happened to see that in a totally different book years later, a poem about the bat is what it's called. Did you ever read that one?
No, I don't think so.
It ends with this little couplet. For something is amiss or out of place when mice with wings can wear a human face.
Yes, that's right. I do remember that now that you
If you've
mention it.
never seen a close-up of a bat, it's just a perfect way to describe them.
Yes,
They really do look like a mouse with wings, but then their face is very human. Their eyes face forward, and they have a nose like ours. It's really kind of spooky, right?
yes,
And he wrote some really amazing poems and snippets of poetry about being very, very depressed. And one of them is In a Dark Time. And I was thinking about that a lot this week, obviously, with Robin Williams' suicide and the stories people have been writing in association with that about his depression and other people's depression, and it's bringing mental health and depression very much into the forefront of our international conversation, which is long overdue, in my opinion. What do you think about that?
Well, yes, I mean, certainly Robin Williams' death has has impacted and affected all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so tragic because I think we felt underneath the his brilliant talent, there was a warm, very likable human being, and it just it just saddens us all very deeply.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I mean, I in the past have had problems with depression. I don't anymore, so I do understand and
You're lucky.
sympathize.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well,
So,
it's much more prevalent than most people realize, and maybe this will help that come more out into the public.
well, it's called the common cold of mental illnesses.
Hmm. I've
And
never heard that.
sometimes people will say to me as though they're sharing a great secret that they have depression, and I think, yes, you and most of the rest of the human race. I mean, when I went through a severe depression, one thing I did was I made up my mind I was not going to treat it like a guilty secret. And
Excellent.
so I was very forthcoming about that. It actually was the reason I cut my teaching career short. I was going through a difficult time that had nothing to do with my teaching, but I told people, and then other people would sidle up to me and kind of whisper the secret that they had experienced depression or struggled with it. And I thought, oh my goodness. That's why I think it's important to be very, very forthright about it so that people feel this is not something to be ashamed of.
That is really a good point. I used to have really severe PMS, premenstrual syndrome is what they used to call it. I don't know what they call it now. And during some of that, I would have my version of depression, but it was very episodic and very short-lived, luckily. But it gave me just a little taste, I think, of what people who really suffer from it might experience. So I
Yes.
certainly have a little bit of empathy and a lot of sympathy. Lots of people in my life, friends and family, have suffered from that, and some of them have attempted suicide. Luckily, it wasn't successful. But I
Yes.
think that for many people, it still is one of those things that is a source of shame if you're over the age of 40 or so. And if you're under that age, I think that the understanding of it as a physical problem, a biological, possibly genetic problem that can be helped by some kinds of medication, diet, exercise, that it isn't really about therapy, although that can be helpful. I think that is really changing with that generation. Do you see that happening too?
Well, I would think so. I know that sadly, my parents' generation would, they would have seen it as a sign of weakness and something you would never admit to. But the tragic thing about that was that I saw in its place, they would, in the place of talking about it, there would be drinking, and
Exactly.
there were suicides, and
Yep.
uh, so I can't see how it is a sign of strength then to pretend that you've got it all together if you have to revert to those kinds of solutions.
Yep.
So that was one reason. I guess I thought I am not going to wear that shame.
Good.
Uh, my family would refer to it delicately as saying, well, that I have bad nerves. And
Oh,
I thought that sounded so Victorian. I thought, no,
yeah.
I don't have bad nerves. I have depression,
Yep.
and I am getting treatment for it. Um, and I know that that would make my mother a bit uncomfortable, but I thought, well, when I look back through my family tree, and see the suicides and the alcoholics. I think obviously that thread was there
Mm-hmm.
all along.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so I'm not a stiff upper lip kind of person.
Good.
I think, no, let's wear our hearts on our sleeve. I think we'll all be better for it.
Well, I think what you're talking about is kind of the new transparency where people are willing and able to speak about things more openly than they used to feel comfortable doing. And I think with Robin Williams' suicide coming out as a result of his depression and other people talking more openly, Heath Ledger also came out a few years ago, the same problem, and killed himself at a very young age. And he wasn't quite as well known. So I think that the more and more people that are very public figures who talk about it, William Styron, of course, has written a lot about it as an author, having suffered from depression all his life, and many other people have talked about being bipolar or having schizophrenia, writing books and giving talks about that, but not to the level of celebrity that Robin Williams is, in my opinion. And
No, that's true.
and so I think this is going to bring it up to a whole new level of being on the Today Show, like it already has been talked about on every AM radio show, and lots of social media comments and discussions like we're having. And
Yes.
so I hope that means that people will come out of the shame closet and recognize it's not their fault and that they do deserve help and could get help.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the time we're living in only provides some help for some people. It isn't necessarily true that everybody who has depression can just go get a pill and be fine. We wish that were true, but it obviously isn't true. So one of the things I've been reading about is deep brain stimulation. Have you been aware of that at all?
No.
Well, they used it first for epileptics. It was the way that they understood to find the exact place in the brain through live awake brain surgery, open
Yes.
brain surgery, and they would touch different parts of the internal part of the brain with an electric probe and see what happened. The person would laugh or start singing or remember their third birthday party or start weeping or talk about a lake they visited or smell they could remember. And then eventually they would find the places through all of this experimenting they did over many decades. They found the places that helped stop or at least limit the number of seizures a person would have. And they could actually put a little electric stimulator, almost like a brain pacemaker in a way, in there that could continually operate. Or sometimes they would put just the deep brain stimulator probe in there and do something that had a long effect without leaving any device behind. And while they were figuring all that out, they realized, oh, this could have other applications. So they've been using it now to treat dementia. And then they started thinking, oh, well, if it works for that, what about other kinds of mental problems? So they started working with the very hard to work with depressives for whom all the medication and all the therapy and all the other treatments had failed or were inadequate. And they are finding some remarkable success for some of these people.
That's wonderful.
It is the most encouraging thing I've heard in a long time. They just talked about it really in the last 12 to 15 months. So DBS, deep brain stimulation. I'll put some links to this on our comment page after we end, and this is archived on YouTube, and people will be able to see that. Because I think if more people ask for that, it will come out of the research closet, so to speak, and become more part of the treatment modalities that insurance will pay for and that people will have access to when they need it. And some of the medications might get improved by that as well once they realize how the electrical probes work. You know, it kind of goes back and forth.
Right.
So that was something I was really encouraged by. And then something else I noticed, I was reading a little bit on your website, which is mariannejones.ca for anybody who wants to know, and it is in the comments on our event page, and it's also in the comments here on this page for people to see. And one of the things I was interested in was the book that you wrote for children. Do you want to talk about that? Tell us about how you came up with the title and how you and the illustrator worked together.
Are you referring to Great Grandma's Gifts?
Yes.
Yes. My more recent one. Well, I wrote that book, let's see, I think perhaps it was 2 years ago. My own mother, who actually is the Arlene in the story, was failing. And at the same time, I had two darling new little grandbabies. And so two things were going on in my mind. One is that I had never done anything to commemorate and honor my mother's talent with her sewing and all the wonderful things she did. She had a very artistic streak, but she left sketching and translated that into fabric art. And so I wanted to do something to commemorate that while she was still alive. The other thing that was going on in my mind was that my grandchildren would not know their great-grandmother because she wasn't going to be around that much longer. And so I wrote this children's book called Great Grandma's Gifts, and I asked my sister, who is a watercolor artist, if she would do the pictures. And a friend of ours who has studied bookmaking arts took the text and the pictures and she hand bound them, and we gave it to Mom for Mother's Day. But the story didn't end there because when Stacy Voss at Split Tree Publishing saw the handmade copy, she asked if she could publish it.
Oh,
We were very excited, of course, and so the book was published last November, almost a year ago. So Mom got to see it, and she was very, very proud of it. She displayed it in her nursing home, and she said, "So people are still interested in an old-fashioned grandma?" I said, "Yes, Mom." And it really seemed to strike a chord with a lot of people who had mothers or grandmothers who knit or sewed or did things like that. And I'm just really over the moon. It was the first book.
that's really wonderful. Well, I want to give a shout out to your mother and your grandmothering and your mothering and all that, because I think that sounds really sweet and wonderful that you made that legacy for your family. We have something similar in my family. My mother's mother, Mimi, original name Mildred, was an incredible crocheter and a knitter. And she made Afghans and hats and ponchos and vests and scarves. She was just nonstop. All the years that I remember her being around, whenever she was just sitting, she had something in her hands, making something. And we each got a lot of different items from her, and I now have quite a few of them that I still use. I'm about to go back to St. Louis, as I said, from living in California, and I've kept the scarf that she made me when I was 12. And it is a whole bunch of different colored rectangles that she sewed together, and it is literally probably about 8 feet long. And it is so soft and wonderful, and I've used it in many places I lived, but for the last 12 years it's just been in a box. So now I get to pull it out again and use it. She also made a beautiful Afghan that I've had on my bed ever since college, which is when she gave it to me, and it's in shades of blue and a little white, and she gave one each just almost exactly the same to my two sisters. So we each have that same Afghan on our beds from our grandmother Mimi. And that is just a wonderful legacy from her.
Well, I want to show you this picture actually. There, can you see it?
Yes.
That is one of the quilts my mother made for my.
Wow.
It's made with satins and silks and velvets, and it hangs on my daughter's living room wall.
Oh, she put it up in a quilt hanger. Oh, that's lovely. Now, does that pattern have a name, or did she originate it?
It's just, no, she would make them square by square just as she felt inspired.
Because, you know, there are a lot of ancient quilt patterns that have names, right?
Oh, no, no, these were all just created out of her head. She didn't follow a pattern.
Nice. She really had it going on, huh? Now, did she do that with other people? Did they have what they used to call quilting parties?
No, my mother was an introvert. She loved to sit at home and do her handiwork, but she was not a very outgoing person.
Okay, so this was something she enjoyed all by herself, but then she liked to give them as gifts.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, that's really sweet. And you say she used a lot of different fabrics. Did any of those fabrics come from clothing that you all used to wear?
People donated fabric to her because they knew she did so much sewing, but also my daughter worked in the costume department of one of our major theater companies in Canada, the Shaw Festival. And the fabrics were purchased from Italy. They were
Wow.
they're very precious fabrics, worth a lot of money. And they were just throwing away the scraps that fell on the floor. So my daughter asked if she could collect the scraps for her grandmother, and she would mail these scraps to Mom. So these are priceless fabrics that we would never be able to obtain in Canada, and it became that work of art that I just showed you.
So do you have some of these photographs of these works of art on your website?
Um, yes, I do believe one of my blogs talks about my mom, and I think that I do have that picture that I showed you. I probably should get a whole bunch of pictures of her quilts. I only put a few samples on, but
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that would be fun to have those up there. Now, we only have about 10 minutes left, so I told you when 10 minutes were left, I was going to ask you if there are any other announcements you want to make or suggestions or comments you'd like to leave us with before I ask you our final question. So this is your time to promote, announce, and explain anything you'd like.
well, this September I will be launching my murder mystery, The Serenity Stone Murder, which is a cozy mystery set in Thunder Bay, and it's published by Split Tree Publishing. So that is happening very soon.
Now, is that
And
Serenity Stone Murders with an S on the end or singular?
singular.
Okay, great, because I'm trying to put this up here.
And
Congratulations on that.
the other thing is that three of my poems have been engraved in granite benches down at the waterfront in Thunder Bay. And
Oh,
so we are going to be having culture days. I think that's all across Canada, uh, late September. So for culture days, the city of Thunder Bay is having an event at the waterfront and for their artists and poets. And so I will be there reading from my poems and explaining what was behind them, what was the inspiration involved. So that's coming up September 28th.
okay, I'm putting that in here too. Are you going to do some book signings or just a reading?
Probably just a reading, although I suppose if people want to come and purchase any books, I'll be there. So I'd be very
Okay,
happy.
I'm putting that down. That's great. Anything else?
Um, well, September is turning out to be a fairly busy month for me. I will be reading at a coffee house also that same weekend in September. And and I'm going to be attending Canada's first large book fair in Toronto in November. And I'm working on a touring schedule. Um, I do have a teacher's package that I've just developed for libraries and schools so that I can come and read from Great Grandma's gifts and show the children some of the toys my mother made. Some one of the
That's great.
so yes, I'm getting kind of busy.
Wow, that's wonderful. If you put some of those up on your website, then people would be able to find out about those. You're going to put up a whole travel log or what they call it, itinerary or something like that of all
Yes.
your appearances and readings and everything. That's wonderful. And are you arranging all those or is your publisher helping arrange those?
Well, the coffee house and the one at the waterfront, oh, and the book launch, they're all arranged by others. The book launch is arranged by my publisher. The other two events are arranged by the City of Thunder Bay, and I was just
Great.
invited. to be there.
That's great. So, are you considered to be an indie published writer because you're not in one of the huge publishing houses?
Yes. Now, my first two books I self-published, Great Grandma's Gifts and The Serenity Stone Murder, are published by Split Tree. But Split Tree is a new publisher. It's a traditional publisher, but it has only been going for a couple of years now. So I guess it qualifies as an indie publisher.
Okay, that's good to know. And are you aware of the Facebook group Clean Indie Reads? Is that one of the places that we both go?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and that was started by Leah, L-I-A, London. And
Yes.
it's really a great site for people whose writing does not include graphic sex, depicts very obvious and graphic violence, or has a lot of swearing. So those are the ways that we call it flinch-free fiction. Or I suppose it could be nonfiction and poetry as well. And that's Clean Indie Reads. That's a group that you can join on Facebook and that you can follow on Twitter if you are that kind of author or if you would enjoy those kinds of writing as a reader. So visit us and check out our different poets and writers and bloggers, and you won't be flinching, at least not because of our language or our scenes. You might flinch for other reasons. I can't vouch for everything that's written there. All right, is there anything else that you'd like to coordinate here for everybody to know about?
Well, offhand, no, I can't think of anything. I think we've sort of covered it.
Okay. Well, I'm interested in you answering the next question that I ask all of our guests, and this has to do with our theme of changes. And you can answer this in any way you'd like, any parts of it that you'd like. We are asking everybody to think about what kinds of personal or local, regional or global, political, spiritual, or climatological or other kinds of changes are really on your mind, happening right in your life, or things that you think about, worry about, wish about, hope about, whatever you'd like to say that is on the theme of changes for you that you've recently been through or that you're anticipating or that you notice going on around you. So, go.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people can identify with me. It's been very much on my mind, the terrible violence that's been happening at a global level. It also happens at a local level, of course.
Mhm. Mhm.
A tragic death of a child in our city, and Thunder Bay is a small city that is not used to those kinds of things. But the things that are happening in Iraq and in Israel um, and in Nigeria are are just so heartbreaking that there are so many innocent
Mhm.
people that are suffering just because they happen to be in the wrong place. And so I guess the change I would like to see is uh, for sanity. Violence has never really solved anything,
Mhm.
and yet we still seem to keep getting these groups that, for whatever reason, think that if they take power and dominate, uh, I don't know, it's going to achieve some purpose of theirs. It never does for long. History has shown that tyrants don't usually last forever, but they do an awful lot of damage while they do last. And my heart is just going out to the hundreds of thousands of people that are helpless and being tortured and raped and slaughtered for no reason whatsoever.
Oh, it's so true.
That's,
It's so upsetting.
so that's a change I would dearly, dearly love to see, is an end to the violence.
You totally have my vote for that, for sure. And one of the things I think about quite often is, where is this generation's Nelson Mandela? Where is the next Dalai Lama? Where is the next Mother Teresa? Where are the people that could lead us, Aung San Suu Kyi, and in all the different parts of the world where these nonviolent protesters, Mahatma Gandhi, from very different cultures and very different backgrounds, rose to lead huge groups of people and inspire hundreds of millions more. I don't see where those people are, despite the prevalence of opportunities to be visible on YouTube and other kinds of social media. Do you have any knowledge of this generation's social nonviolent leaders that we could look to? Because I haven't seen any.
No, I'm not aware of any person like that, and it's a very good point. It is something we could look for and pray for.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Nadine Gordimer and the deaths of these wonderful people that led us through their poetry and their writing, Maya Angelou. And, where's the next generation? And maybe they're out there, and maybe they're just not well known yet, but I think that's what we need, are the authors, the writers, the creative and political and social activists that have that nonviolent commitment and really understand the value of communicating and caring and compassion, not turning to violence. I agree with you completely. And I think we're going to end on that note. And what I'd like to do then is make it possible for you to say your goodbyes and thank yous, and then I'll end with mine.
Well, thank you. This was a great honor and a pleasure, and I hope that people tuned in or have enjoyed it as much as I have. And I hope to hear from some of you. Please feel free to come on my blog and post comments and get in touch, because I would love to hear from you.
And that is Marianne Jones, MarianneJones.ca. And that's really important for everybody to know, that it's not COM, because she's in Canada. And thank you, Marianne, for jumping in at the last minute to take poor Anna Vaktorovich's place. She got beset by bed bugs in a hotel, and then had problems with her car, and then had problems with a rental property, all converging yesterday. Poor thing. I mean, she just could barely even email me. I felt so bad for her. You can read her post on Facebook and just see how miserable she's been, and that's the reason she had to bow out at the last minute. She had to take her car in and get out of the hotel, and she didn't have any internet connection. I mean, it was just a mess. So we're going to have her on later in the fall. I look forward to that, and thank you again for being here. Thank you for reading your poetry when I kept getting kicked off this Hangout. I apologize to everyone who's watched this. I hope you continued past the glitches, because Marianne did not get kicked out. I tried to use the screen share. Before we started, it was fine, and then it kicked me out. So I'm going to have to work on what that is. I'm going to call my peeps and find out. Thanks, everybody. Look for this on YouTube in the archive version if you're already watching that. Thank you for watching, and please share. And good luck with the changes. Signing off, Sally Ember, Changes HOA. No show next week. August 20th, I'm on the road to St. Louis. Check in on August 27th, and let's meet with Connie Dunn, D-U-N-N, another author, writer, and blogger. Thanks, everybody. Good luck with your changes.
Thanks, Sally.